Imagine yourself standing at the edge of the ocean, the salty breeze gently brushing against your skin. You watch as the waves roll in, one after another, crashing against the shore and receding back into the vast sea. Each wave is unique, yet they all follow the same pattern, rising, falling, and eventually fading. No wave is ever the same, yet they all move forward, constantly changing, always flowing toward something new. In many ways, life mirrors the ocean. Like the waves, life is in a continuous state of change. One moment we're born, the next we grow, age, and inevitably, we pass on. Just as the ocean is vast and endless, so too is the cycle of life. But amidst this eternal flow, there is one thing that many of us fear above all else: the fear of death. It's the ultimate wave, the final chapter in the ocean of existence. Why do we fear it so much? Perhaps because we see it as an end, a loss, an unknown. We fear the finality of it, the silence that follows. But what if we could see death differently? What if we could view it not as the end, but as a natural transition? What if death is not something to fear, but simply another phase in the great cycle of existence, just like the changing of the seasons? In this video, we will explore why death should not be feared. Through the timeless wisdom of the Buddha, we will understand how death is not an enemy to resist, but a natural part of life's unfolding. When we come to understand the true nature of life, death, and impermanence, we discover that peace, not fear, is the way forward. Join me as we explore how we can embrace death as part of life's beautiful and continuous journey. A personal story: the fear of death. Let me share a story about a dear friend of mine, Mai. She was a vibrant woman, full of warmth and laughter, always surrounded by the love of her family and friends. She cherished life deeply, every morning walk, every shared meal, every sunset that painted the sky. Yet, despite the joy she found in living, she carried a silent burden, a fear that shadowed her happiness. Mai was terrified of death. The thought of leaving behind her children, her memories, her very sense of self filled her with dread. She would often lie awake at night, unable to shake the anxiety of the unknown. She feared what lay beyond, whether there was anything after this life, or if everything would simply disappear into nothingness. She had spent her life building relationships, creating meaning, and loving deeply. How could it all just end? One day, during a meditation retreat, Mai confided in me about her fear. "I can't stop thinking about it," she said. "The moment I remember that one day I will die, a wave of panic washes over me. How do I escape this fear?" I looked at her and smiled gently. "Mai, have you ever watched the seasons change?" I asked. "The trees bloom in spring, flourish in summer, fade in autumn, and sleep in winter. Yet, when spring comes again, new life emerges. Do the trees fear losing their leaves? Do the rivers fear flowing into the vast ocean?" She was quiet for a long moment. I continued, "Everything changes, Mai. Nothing stays the same. Just as the seasons shift, so too does life. And death, it's not an end, but simply another phase in the great cycle of existence." At first, she resisted the idea. "But I'm not a tree," she said with a nervous laugh. "I'm a mother, a friend, a person with memories and emotions. How can I just accept that one day I won't exist?" I nodded in understanding. "The fear comes from thinking that you are only this body, this name, this collection of experiences. But the Buddha taught that everything that arises must also pass. When you understand this, you no longer cling to what must naturally change. You begin to see death not as something to resist, but as part of the flow of life itself." Over the next few days, Mai meditated on these words. At first, it was difficult. Her mind fought against the idea of letting go. But slowly, something shifted. She started seeing impermanence not as something tragic, but as something beautiful. She realized that because life is fleeting, every moment is precious. Months later, she told me something remarkable. "I no longer feel afraid," she said, smiling softly. "I still don't know what happens after death, but I no longer need to know. All I know is that right now, I am alive, and that is enough. From that moment forward, Mai lived with a new sense of peace. She cherished her time with her loved ones, not out of fear of losing them, but out of appreciation for the time they had together. Death was no longer a shadow that loomed over her, but a gentle whisper reminding her to embrace life fully. Understanding impermanence, Anicca. To understand why death is not to be feared, we must first recognize the nature of impermanence, a truth that the Buddha emphasized as central to all existence. All conditioned things are impermanent. This includes everything around us, from the blooming of a flower to the flowing of a river, even to the beating of our own hearts. Nothing remains the same, and everything is in a constant state of transformation. Think of the changing seasons. Spring brings life and renewal. Summer nurtures growth. Autumn signals the passage of time, and winter invites stillness. Each season gives way to the next in a seamless rhythm, never resisting change, never fearing what comes next. Our lives follow the same pattern. We are born, we grow, we age, and eventually, we pass on. But just as winter does not mark the end of all life, death does not mark the end of existence. It is simply another phase of the great cycle. Even our bodies illustrate this truth. The cells we had a decade ago are no longer the same ones we have today. Every breath we take, every moment we live, we are changing. So why do we fear the inevitable change that is death, when it is merely a continuation of what has been happening all along? We suffer because we resist impermanence. We cling to youth, fearing age. We hold on to possessions, relationships, and identities, afraid of loss. But life moves forward, regardless of how tightly we grasp at it. When we accept impermanence, we find peace. We begin to appreciate each moment for what it is, temporary, yet beautiful. We see that death, like all things, is simply a part of life's unfolding, not something to fear, but something to embrace. The truth of no self, anatta. The Buddha also taught the concept of no self, or anatta, a teaching that challenges our deepest assumptions about who we are. We fear death because we cling to the idea of a permanent, unchanging self. We tell ourselves, I am this body, this mind, this personality. But is that really true? If we look closely, we see that what we call I is nothing more than a collection of ever-changing experiences, thoughts, and emotions. Imagine a river. It appears as a single, continuous flow, but in reality, the water is always moving, always being replaced. The same is true for us. Our bodies are constantly aging, our thoughts shifting, our emotions rising and falling. The person you were 10 years ago is not the same person you are today. Your body has changed. Your ideas have evolved, and your memories have faded or been replaced. If nothing about us remains the same, then what is it that we fear losing when we think of death? Think about this. If you were to lose an old piece of clothing, would you feel that a part of you is gone? Of course not. Just as we let go of worn-out garments, so too will we one day let go of this body. The physical form may pass, but the essence of who we are, the energy we have cultivated, the kindness we have shared, the wisdom we have gained, continues, shaped by the karma we create. When we understand this truth, we loosen our grip on the illusion of self, and in doing so, we free ourselves from the fear of death. Because if there is no fixed, permanent me to protect, then what is there to fear? Like a wave that rises and falls back into the ocean, we, too, are part of something far greater than ourselves, always changing, always flowing, always continuing. The importance of letting go of attachment. One of the deepest sources of our fear of death is attachment, our clinging to people, possessions, achievements, and even our own identities. We fear losing what we have because we believe it defines us. We hold tightly to our loved ones, afraid of being separated from them. We cling to our possessions, believing they provide us security. We identify with our successes and status, thinking they give our lives meaning. But the Buddha taught that attachment leads to suffering, and the tighter we grasp, the more we struggle when life inevitably forces us to let go. Consider the story of a businessman I once knew. He had spent decades building a vast empire, working tirelessly to accumulate wealth, power, and influence. To the world, he was a great success. Yet, in private, he lived in fear that his fortune might one day disappear. Fear that his competitors would surpass him. Fear that his legacy would be forgotten. He clung to his empire as if it could shield him from impermanence. But as time passed, reality became impossible to ignore. His body aged, his health declined, and he saw others rise to take his place in the world of business. One day, he confided in me, "I spent my whole life trying to hold on to something I was never meant to keep." In that moment, he realized a truth that had been there all along: nothing in this life is truly ours to hold forever. His wealth, his power, even his body, would one day fade away. With this realization, he began to let go, not of his responsibilities, but of his attachment to them. He stopped living in fear of losing what he had and instead started focusing on living with mindfulness and gratitude. He no longer measured his worth by what he owned, but by the kindness he shared, the wisdom he passed on, and the peace he cultivated within himself. This shift in perspective allowed him to finally experience true freedom, a life no longer burdened by the anxiety of inevitable change. Loving without clinging. The Buddha's teachings on attachment do not mean that we should abandon our loved ones or detach from life. Rather, they encourage us to love without grasping. Imagine holding a butterfly in your hands. If you squeeze too tightly, you will crush it, but if you hold it gently, with an open palm, it remains free, and you can appreciate its beauty without fear. This is how we should approach love and life itself. We can cherish our relationships without trying to control them. We can enjoy the beauty of the present moment without fearing its end. We can work hard and strive for success without letting it define who we are. Letting go of attachment does not mean letting go of love. It means freeing love from fear. Facing death with open arms. When we understand that nothing was ever truly ours to begin with, we stop fearing the moment when we must let it all go. Death, in this light, is not a loss. It is simply the closing of one chapter and the beginning of another. Those who cling tightly to life resist death with fear and regret. But those who have learned to let go, to embrace impermanence, to love without grasping, they meet death with peace, knowing they have lived fully. So, let us live with gratitude, love with openness, and let go of fear. And when the time comes for us to leave this world, may we do so with light hearts, knowing that we were never meant to hold on, we were only meant to experience, to love, and to let go. The role of karma and mindfulness in facing death. The Buddha taught that karma, the law of cause and effect, shapes not only our present life but also our future existence. Just as a farmer plants seeds and later reaps a harvest, our thoughts, words, and actions create the conditions for what follows. If we cultivate kindness, wisdom, and mindfulness, we generate positive karma that ensures a peaceful transition when the time of death arrives. Conversely, if we act out of greed, anger, and ignorance, we carry those burdens forward, creating suffering for ourselves and others. This understanding of karma transforms how we view death. It is not a random, meaningless event but a natural continuation of the choices we make in this life. The way we live directly influences the way we die. If we spend our days chasing temporary pleasures, consumed by attachment and fear, then when the moment of death comes, we will struggle, clinging to what must inevitably be left behind. But if we live mindfully, embracing impermanence, cultivating compassion, and letting go of fear, then we will meet death with serenity, knowing that we have sown the seeds of peace. Mindfulness, a path to peace. One of the most powerful tools in preparing for death is mindfulness, the practice of being fully present in each moment. When we are mindful, we observe life as it unfolds, without clinging to the past or worrying about the future. We see our fears, including the fear of death, as passing thoughts, like clouds drifting across the sky, impermanent and insubstantial. Many people avoid thinking about death, as if ignoring it will make it disappear. But the Buddha encouraged us to face death directly, not with fear, but with awareness. He compared mindfulness to a flame that lights our way in the darkness. When we practice mindfulness, we train ourselves to meet death with clarity rather than confusion, with acceptance rather than resistance. The monk who meditated on death daily. I once met a monk who had a remarkable approach to death. Every morning, before he began his day, he would sit quietly in meditation and reflect, "One day, I will die, this body will return to the earth, everything I hold dear will pass." At first, this may seem like a morbid practice, but for him, it was not about fear, it was about freedom. By acknowledging death daily, he became deeply aware of life's impermanence. Instead of running from this truth, he embraced it, and in doing so, he learned how to truly live. He told me, "Most people live as if they will never die, and so they waste their time on things that do not matter. But when you remember death, you do not take a single moment for granted." Through this practice, he developed a profound sense of peace. He had no fear of death, because he had prepared his mind for it. He knew that when his time came, he would simply move forward, like a traveler taking the next step on a long journey. Living and dying with awareness. So how can we apply this wisdom to our own lives? We do not need to be monks to cultivate mindfulness and positive karma. We can start by living each day with kindness, presence, and intention. When we speak, we can choose words that uplift rather than harm. When we act, we can be guided by compassion rather than selfishness. When we face difficulties, we can remain mindful, remembering that everything, even suffering, is impermanent. By practicing mindfulness and living with awareness, we transform not only the way we live, but also the way we will face death. When our final moment arrives, we will not be lost in fear or regret. Instead, we will meet it with peace, with gratitude, and with the quiet understanding that death is not an end, but simply another step in the great unfolding of life. The story of a peaceful passing. Let me share with you the story of a revered Buddhist monk who lived to the remarkable age of 106 years. Throughout his long life, he had been a guiding light for many, teaching the path of mindfulness, compassion, and wisdom. His presence was calm and unwavering, like a steady flame that had burned brightly for over a century. In his final days, as he lay on his simple bed in the monastery, his disciples gathered around him. The air was filled with quiet reverence, not sorrow, for they knew their master had lived a life of deep understanding. One of the younger monks, unable to contain his emotions, softly asked, "Master, are you afraid?" The old monk opened his eyes and smiled, a smile of peace, of knowing. "Afraid?" he repeated gently, "I have spent my whole life preparing for this moment. There is no fear here, only gratitude for the life I have lived." His words carried a profound truth. He had embraced impermanence, practiced mindfulness, and cultivated a heart free from attachment. He understood that death was not the end, but merely a transition, like the setting sun that inevitably rises again. With one final deep breath, he let go without resistance, without regret, only peace. His passing was not met with wailing or despair, but with silent reflection. His disciples did not mourn his death as a loss but honored it as a lesson. The way he left this world was the ultimate teaching, that death is not to be feared when one has truly lived with awareness. This story reminds us of the power of preparation, the beauty of acceptance, and the peace that comes from a life well lived, when we stop running from death and instead embrace it as a natural part of life's rhythm. We open ourselves to a deeper sense of freedom, we live without fear, and when the time comes, we leave this world not with sorrow, but with gratitude in our hearts. In the grand rhythm of existence, death is not an end, but a continuation, a passage into the next phase of being. Just as a river flows unceasingly, never truly stopping, only changing its course, when we come to understand the impermanence of all things, the illusion of a fixed self, and the freedom that comes with letting go, we release ourselves from the suffering that attachment and fear create. Most people spend their lives trying to avoid the thought of death, as if ignoring it will make it disappear. But in reality, awareness of death is what makes life more precious. When we accept that everything is fleeting, we stop wasting time on things that do not matter. We no longer hold on to grudges, chase empty desires, or live in fear of the unknown. Instead, we cherish each moment, love without reservation, and find joy in simply being alive. The Buddha taught that death is the greatest teacher, for it reminds us of what truly matters. If today were your last day, how would you live? Would you hold on to resentment? Or would you choose to forgive? Would you chase material success? Or would you embrace the people who matter most? When we understand that our time is limited, we stop postponing happiness. By cultivating mindfulness and positive karma, we prepare ourselves for death, not with fear, but with peace. We live with kindness, knowing that our actions ripple beyond our own existence. And when our final moment arrives, we do not fight or resist. Instead, we welcome it as part of the natural unfolding of life, like a traveler setting forth on a new journey. So, live fully, love deeply, let go of your attachments, and when death comes, as it inevitably will, meet it with peace, not as an enemy, but as an old friend, guiding you forward into the infinite flow of existence.